Welcome. We'll wait a few seconds so everybody can come in. Odile, I'll let you start in 30 seconds.
A second. All right, so let's go. Let's jump in. So hi everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Odile. I think at this point everyone knows each other here. Co-founder of WantedDesign. I'm here with Claire, and Daniela is here somewhere, but she can't really access today. She has a bad connections, but she's here with us. So welcome to the fourth Academy session. Today is a special session because it's presented in partnership with Be Original America, which is a key organization for the industry, educating and protecting original design. And we are proud member. WantedDesign is a proud member of this organization. And Karen is going to talk a bit about that as an individual, because I think you could also become a member. And Karen, again, is going to speak about it. This is, again, a very important session for us, and we are very pleased to have a special guest, Amy Auscherman, that is going to present what she's doing at MillerKnoll and talk more. I will introduce her later, but I'd love just now to pass the mic to Karen to introduce a little bit Be Original America. Karen?
Thank you, Odile, and welcome everybody. Be Original Americas was started back in 2012. We're actually celebrating our 13th anniversary next month. It was started with just 10 individuals whose companies' intellectual properties were constantly being copied. Be Original Americas is a nonprofit advocacy group with over 180 members. Committed to informing, educating, and influencing manufacturers, design professionals, educators, consumers, students, anyone who will listen about the economic, ethical, and environmental value of authentic design. We are always looking for new members, supporters, followers, etc. So I will send my email in the chat, and if anyone's interested in learning more or getting involved or joining, you can reach out to me.
Thank you, Karen. So just I know the session is being recorded, so for anyone who was not able to join and those who are here, you can also share that with your friends and from the group. So we will share the session after. And as usual, we have the Q&A box, so you can use this to post your questions there. Either mid of the session, we'll do a pause for questions, or we'll wait for the end of the session. But please put your questions here. We also will make you panelists if you want to speak with Amy directly. So I think that's it for the logistics. And now, that's my pleasure to introduce you to Amy. So Amy Auscherman is the director of archives and brand heritage at MillerKnoll, was formerly Herman Miller, where she managed the extensive corporate archives of MillerKnoll brands, including Herman Miller and Knoll. Her role includes conservation and collections management, archival product development, and communications. Amy co-edited Herman Miller, A Way of Living, a book that was published at Phaidon in 2019, highly recommended. So Amy, you will share your experience overseeing the integration of the Herman Miller and Knoll brand archives following their 2021 merger, uniting those two most influential legacies in modern design. Amy, I think I will pass to you the mic, and the floor is yours. And a big thank you again, Amy, for joining this session. I'm not sure if you will mention, but Amy is obviously part of the Be Original America and active member, and we work together on special, activities. So very happy to have you, Amy.
Thank you, Odile. Thanks for having me. And Karen, thanks for that great explanation of what Be Original is and what it does. And as Odile said, it's an organization that I've been excited to be part of since starting at Herman Miller almost, or I guess 10 years ago now MillerKnoll. But copyright infringement, IP, knockoffs, as we call them, have actually been part of the industry since, kind of Knoll and Herman Miller started in the mid-40s. Osamu Noguchi made a lamp for Knoll that was very quickly knocked off. The Eames chairs sort of, as soon as they hit the market, also had copiers. So it's sort of an ongoing issue in our industry that really figuring out how to educate people, students, consumers, it's ongoing, and I think it's on the brands a bit, and it's really amazing to be able to partner with other companies to sort of talk about these issues and how to make sure people are getting authentic product that has a warranty if you're coming from MillerKnoll. But I will share my screen. I'm going to talk today about my very fun and, okay, let me see, getting it to go to full screen. Okay. Oh, let me try again. Okay. Can you guys see it full screen? All good?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So as Odile said, I'm the Director of Archives and Brand Heritage for MillerKnoll, and that is a job when I was in library school, I could have never imagined myself in. And so I feel like my first kind of experience or awareness of design was working in a rare book library on the campus of Indiana University, and I fell in love with the marbled end papers that were used in some of the more custom book bindings, either for people's collections or just, books used to be made a lot different, handmade, and these beautiful end papers that would be right inside of the book always were super interesting to me, and sort of started documenting them early on. But really the construction of the books, the different kinds of paper, the different designs, all of which are sort of regionally specific, were amazing to learn about, and kind of where I feel like I first started noticing the details of things. But just a bit of my background. Started off, studied art history, got my master's of library science, and now I'm selling chairs. But my job after or towards the end of grad school was working for the Indianapolis Museum of Art, digitizing an architectural archive for the home you see here, the Miller House and Garden, which is located in Columbus, Indiana. The architects listed on record for the project are Eero Saarinen and Alexander Girard. Ray and Charles Eames designed furniture for the home. The Eames Aluminum Group, which we still make today, was originally conceived as outdoor furniture for the home and now is a bestseller for Herman Miller, mostly in the office. But I spent 3 years digitizing all of the documents from the design, building, and maintenance of the home. So that was, I feel like, really my design education in a way. It contains, as you'll see as I go through my slides, correspondence from when the client first acquired the land to build on, the first rug Girard purchased for the home, which you actually see here in the background by the fireplace. But really, there was a meticulous sort of record kept of everything that ever happened to the home. And when the Indianapolis Museum of Art acquired this house as a house museum, it also acquired the archive. And so my first real design archives job, like I said, was digitizing the collection. So this is a plan for the textiles for the home, or an early iteration of that. So you see Girard kind of picking out pillow textiles for that cool conversation you just saw, or draperies for the kids' rooms, or textiles for a couch. But that this survived and was kept is just obviously such a cool object, but also is a window into Girard's process, and how decisions get made. Part of the archive also included press. The Millers, when they built this home, wanted Saarinen and the other designers to get press for the project, but they were very private. So the house was limitedly published, but obviously the archive kind of had examples of where that had shown up. This is maybe for like the younger people who maybe join or the students, but part of the project that I worked on at the IMA was funded by a National Endowment for the Humanities grant. So shout out grants. But part of the grant stipulation was that we would share about the project as we were doing it. And so this was at a time when Tumblr was new on the scene as a social media platform, a sharing platform. And a lot of libraries and museums were tapping into it as a resource to share primary source collections. Because in reality, not everybody is going and poring over every single document of an archive, nor do they have time. It doesn't mean it's not of interest. And so we were able to use Tumblr to share objects like this. This was a pattern for a cushion for a tulip chair that was around the dining table at the Miller House. Obviously, it's really cool and beautiful, and it's handmade by Gerard. So we had a lot of success sharing these documents, curating them, kind of pulling out the coolest things we were seeing every day. And it garnered some press for the project itself, which ultimately led me to Herman Miller. And so that was about 10 years ago. And Herman Miller had kept an archive almost from the outset of the company's beginnings in 1905. I like to credit executive assistants for really being the first archivists on the scene to both sort of coordinate the correspondence between business leaders and designers, but they also had the foresight to share this stuff. So in West Michigan, we've kept documents of design that weren't unlike the Miller House collection, correspondence, architectural drawings, material samples, furniture itself. But there are some really like key moments of design history that are represented in the collection like this. This is George Nelson, who at the time was the newly minted design director at Herman Miller, writing to Herman Miller founder DJ Dupree about acquiring the rights to Eames furniture, the molded plywood furniture, which had recently been displayed at MoMA, and there was actually sort of a rush for different manufacturers to acquire this line or distribute it. And Herman Miller was early on the scene with George Nelson, but so was Knoll. So we have actually some amazing correspondence that illuminates Hans Knoll was also frantically writing the Eameses and saying, we want to acquire this molded furniture for the company that we are building. So, we have these great documents and correspondence, but also, this definitely speaks to the Be Original side of things, but the design patents for Eames furniture. And so the patents for some of these objects, both at Herman Miller and now at Knoll, were assigned to the companies. Therefore, we have these amazing collections of actual paper patents that show you how that happened or how design happened at that point of time. One of my favorite collections in the Herman Miller archive is our product development files from our model shop. And so the model shop internally at Herman Miller was really the resource for the designers to help them. The designers, the Eameses were very, the kinds of designers they were they were designing the chair, but they were also coming up with the technology to make the chair, in addition to the marketing material, the showrooms. Other designers, like the Nelson office, really relied on the internal resources of the Herman Miller engineering team to sometimes help them bring stuff to life. This is an example. So George Nelson's office had put out the coconut chair, which I think received a lot of press. They went so far as to prototype it. They got to this sort of arrived at these thoughts of why shouldn't we do this? the chair is ugly and the chair is uncomfortable, probably two of the greatest reasons to not make something. But again, it's really this record of how design happened or it didn't happen, and that the company kept these documents is pretty remarkable, and now really is a resource that we can use going back if we're deciding to maybe reintroduce something, which is, as you'll see as we go on, part of our job is helping inform archival reintroductions. But if anybody comes to me in the future and says, we should do a high back coconut chair, I can show them this and say, no, we should not. We also have an amazing photography collection that's super rich and is made up of photos from Ray and Charles Eames, architectural photographers like Ezra Stoller, Balthazar Korab, but really are this great representation or moment in time of what the showrooms looked like, what the marketing looked like. This photo, for example, was made to promote the Eames's new molded plywood line. The photograph was art directed by the Eames office, probably Ray. But this was a pretty radical look at the time. You know, the camera is looking down. This looks like an assemblage. It's not just a plain room full of furniture. It has an artfulness to it. Similar to one of my favorite photos, because I love Noguchi, this kind of monumental look at the Noguchi coffee table, which was used to launch it in the late 40s. And it's a photograph by Ezra Stoller, who was at the time a really famous architectural photographer. And it's interesting to see a piece of furniture photographed like a building, and it does give it that literal aura, and it looks like it's landing from outer space. We also have literal snapshots from colleagues over the years who were out at the Eames house in the Pacific Palisades and get these moments of designers just sort of living at home. You know, just fun to see we're all human, and it's interesting that these snapshots have been kept in the corporate archive over the years. We also have a huge graphic design collection. You know, I think between Knoll and Herman Miller, they were not only making the furniture, but they were figuring out ways to sell it. And really amazing graphic design at the time was, I think, a shared approach from both companies. The Herman Miller M, it's an M, was designed by Irving Harper, who worked for George Nelson's office, and he was creating ads like this where it's not showing you furniture per se, but it's showing you the tools that make it. These are more ads by Irving Harper. So him as sort of a typographer, or he said once, had the pleasure of meeting him while he was still alive. It's like, I love doing graphic design for Herman Miller because they would let me make the furniture as small as I wanted on the page. So he's kind of getting at that in these magazine ads, but again, just really strong typographic moves that are in service of, as George Nelson sort of put it, like, you know, we want to make ads that make people stop as they're paging through a magazine. And at that time, it would have been publications like Interiors or the Architectural Forum. But these were really bold. I also love the press collection that has been kept over the years. So the press clippings. This was sort of a gutter ad in the New Yorker for the Noguchi coffee table, sculpture in wood and glass. But it's fun to see how in the contemporary times, these designs, again, were both sold and advertised in sort of major magazines. So we have a vault in one of our buildings, and so this is a view into that. Again, we have a furniture collection that you'll see more of, but also have kept items over the years like photography negatives, sort of what you saw in the last few slides, a lot of paper, catalogs, but also drawings themselves. And so again, you know, designers would work often with Herman Miller's internal technical department to really understand how to actually make this stuff at scale. Obviously, this exploded view of the Eames Lounge is pretty remarkable, and it really shows you, it's this luxury object, but it's also a system and a kit of parts, and you see that quite literally in this drawing. Another aspect of the work that we do in the archive, supporting the business, obviously, but also being researchers ourselves, kind of get to uncover stories and people that haven't been quite committed in the same way to the design history canon. The woman you see here on the left is named Tomoko Miho, and she was the head of the graphic design department at George Nelson's office in the late 50s through the 70s. And she was the one responsible for the catalog that you see on the right, which for Herman Miller was made at a time when it was really starting to explore what we now refer to as the contract furniture industry. But even creating this binder as a sales tool was innovative at the time because you could constantly update it. And it's just a cool piece of graphic design. But Tomoko was, working on layouts, but also working on art directing for photo shoots. So I love this image of the Eames stacking and ganging chairs. And for Herman Miller, this was the first product that really sold in mass. So to schools, churches, community centers, and this product and the way that it sold really started to get the business thinking about systems and not just residential, but obviously getting into office and beyond. But I love this photo because it's a bit surreal. You have these these chairs stacked super high. No one would ever stack them that high, but it turns it into almost sculpture. But you're also seeing the utility of the design as well. And these are a few more catalogs by Tomoko where just using really great color. And actually, some of these designs we have now revived as posters for our retail program. And that's a good transition to sort of talk about, we are a research sort of function within the business, but also helping drive product development or reissues that we do now across the brands. And so a few years ago, DWR, Design Within Reach, which is part of the MillerKnoll sort of family now, needed more beds. And so they came to the archives in search of, are there any beds that we could revive as part of the line? And we got literally into the drawings, did some research, and came with some George Nelson thin edge. And so the drawing on the left is from when the product was first introduced in the mid-50s. And then on the right is newer product photography from when we reissued it a few years ago. Same with this daybed. So this is obviously a very literal one-to-one of how this gets used or how this resource gets used for the business, but fun to see. And then when we're going out to PR this stuff, the archive is definitely a resource for content that sort of establishes, the history of the object, the story, and to literally have the photography to go back to and to share, I think resonates. As Odile said, we worked on a monograph a few years ago about the history of Herman Miller. That was an amazing project, but really was a testament to the amount of amazing material that Herman Miller has kept in its archive over the years. We were also able to do research at the Library of Congress, MoMA, Cooper Hewitt, but really it's this visual deep dive into Herman Miller, its history, how it was shaped by culture and how it shaped culture. But I think when we launched it, it was sort of a great reminder of who the company was, and we were able to take actual objects from our archive and kind of, as we were saying when we were doing it, it's like the book in real life. Even the visual language of the exhibition itself kind of echoes that of the book. Just a lot of material, but you really see the depth and breadth of the collection. And then a few years ago, got the most exciting and crazy news that I could have ever imagined as a design archivist. And, working at Herman Miller Knoll was sort of the only other brand or company that piqued my interest in terms of, do they have an archive? And if they do, it's probably just as cool as Herman Miller's, because it's Florence Knoll, it's Eero Saarinen, Harry Bertoia, really kind of the only other company that was doing something as amazing as Herman Miller at mid-century. And so when the news of the merger launched or dropped, it was like Christmas morning for me. And after that, we were doing some research in our collection, and honestly, at times had come across, board minutes or internal correspondence where leadership, even back to the 70s, even earlier, was contemplating, do we merge with Knoll? Do we try to acquire them? This was sort of an idea that had been floating around even before people who work at Miller Knoll now were around, maybe even born. But we were made aware of this exhibition that happened at Cranbrook Art Museum in the mid 1970s, called Knoll, Herman Miller: The Development of Modern Furniture. And the exhibition design itself, as you see, literally positions the companies next to each other or in conversation. And so this was amazing to reference and go back to our leadership to sort of share and talk about. And I think, as kind of had an understanding of Knoll as we started to embark on figuring out what their sort of archive held, and really gaining a better sense of the history of the company. But these are two early ads that I love to show together. The one on the left was actually the first ad that George Nelson's office with Irving Harper made for Herman Miller. And it's entirely graphic because the furniture wasn't ready yet to photograph when they had to put the ad to print. And so Irving, designed the M for this purpose, which you see used here. And then also the cute little overlay of wood grain on the M that's maybe giving you an idea of what's to come from Herman Miller Furniture Company, wood furniture. Then on the right is an ad by Herbert Matter, who was brought on by Florence Knoll as she and Hans were building the Knoll Company. And he is sort of responsible for the early graphic expression, so the slab serif typeface. But I love that Herbert Matter also created an ad or an expression of the company that's super powerful, but also doesn't have any furniture pictured in it. So showing you early on that there is a shared sensibility from the companies. But also these people, sort of the protagonists of mid-century modern design in America. Eero Saarinen grew up on the Cranbrook campus in Eastern Michigan, and so Cranbrook was modeled as an American Bauhaus in a way. And his father, Eliel Saarinen, early modern architect, moved to the States to design the campus and also run the art academy, which is where Saarinen and his sister Loya grew up. It's also where Florence Knoll grew up. So she was a Michigander, or grew up in Saginaw, but was orphaned in her preteen years, which is really tragic. And she was given sort of a choice of boarding schools to go to, and she visited a few around Michigan and picked Cranbrook based on the beauty of its campus. And she showed an interest in architecture early on, and was sort of effectively adopted into the Saarinen family. She would summer with them in Finland, met Alvar Aalto, but really kind of building Florence's architecture pedigree really started early on, and included, obviously, this amazing sort of closeness with the Saarinen family. But Cranbrook is also where Ray and Charles Eames met. And Charles Eames was recruited by Eero's father to come teach at the school. And then Eero and Charles became really great friends and would go on to collaborate on furniture design projects pre-Herman Miller and Knoll, and then beyond. And then Harry Bertoia was also at Cranbrook. So working in the metalsmithing department and collaborating on projects with all of these people. But sort of just, even internally at the company, all of this information for me was at the top of my mind when the merger was announced, as a design historian, but really this was information that was not immediately apparent to our salespeople, our colleagues, even some people on our leadership team. So it's really this beautiful story of the design DNA of modern design in America that really starts with these people who would go on to be so influential, and crucial to the brands and their development. So proof, Charles Eames, Eero Saarinen, best friends. And this is an image of them when they were working on a shared entry into the 1941 Museum of Modern Art Organic Design for Home Furnishings competition, of which Ray, Charles, Eero, I'm sure Florence was in the ether even as she was off studying in Europe and then in Illinois at IIT with Mies. But Saarinen and Eames collaborated on the suite of furniture that included modular storage, modular soft seating, and molded plywood furniture, which I think when you see the chairs around this dining table or the lounge chairs, these are the early shapes that get you to Arrow's womb chair for Knoll, the Eames molded fiberglass chairs, and even their molded plywood chairs, which really that's where these experiments in bending and molding plywood truly started. But they won this competition together. The winner at the time was supposed to be paired with a manufacturer to actually make and sell these things. But even though they won and they had examples that they could show for the MoMA, they still had trouble actually mass manufacturing these molded plywood chairs that I think the Eameses would go on and really continue to experiment with and perfect. I talked about the Miller House at the outset. And so again, for me, MillerKnoll is sort of this personal full circle, and that my design education and interest in design really started off with this project that included all of these designers, Girard, Eames, Saarinen, Kevin Roche. So people that, again, were working in these different spheres, whether strictly in architecture, but literally for the different companies, Herman Miller and Knoll. And yet this project took place between the early 50s and the late 50s, times that Eames, Girard, Saarinen would have been very much ensconced at the separate companies, Knoll and Herman Miller, and yet they're still coming together to create arguably one of the most iconic interiors in North America, if not the world. There's also some sharing of designers, as Florence Knoll is building Knoll and George Nelson is building Herman Miller. And actually, Alexander Girard, who would go on to be the head of the textile division at Herman Miller, first was designing and distributing textiles through Knoll. And he also designed the coffee table that is in front of Florence here, and Cartree, her dog. But Girard started off with Knoll, and then once he started working with Herman Miller on textiles, Florence promptly took his designs out of the line. But as I said, it was almost like Christmas morning when we heard that Knoll would be joining the Herman Miller and now MillerKnoll universe. And a big part of our job over the last few years has been understanding the holdings at Knoll, archival holdings. And so those collections have existed between Pennsylvania, New York, and a few other places where Knoll has kept material over the years. But this was in East Greenville, Pennsylvania, which is Eastern Pennsylvania, and these amazing posters, huge posters designed by Massimo and Lella Vignelli for a Knoll exhibition that was held at the Louvre in the early 70s. And this was a project that I had read about in books, and then to see, these amazing life-size posters used as artwork in the product development department at Knoll was really special to come upon. But similar to Herman Miller, they kept catalogs, design drawings, and so really that both sort of the marketing material that the companies created to actually help sell and storytell about this stuff, in addition to the tooling for the tulip or pedestal series, and many, many, many drawers, flat files of technical drawings for product. And so this was all material that we sort of had to inventory, catalog, and then eventually move to Michigan. So again, original drawings of the Saarinen pedestal series, but then also a huge furniture collection that Knoll had amassed over years and years. At different points in time, Knoll had a museum in New York City and in Pennsylvania, but at the time of acquisition, there wasn't a museum. And so a big part of our job was kind of rediscovering the furniture collection, assessing it from a conservation standpoint, and then figuring out how to use it. So it was in various states of sort of, I wouldn't say disrepair. Everything actually turned out pretty great, but we would come upon these sort of sculptural masses of really important pieces of furniture that, no one had been in charge of taking care of. And so we had the real honor and privilege to kind of help reassess that for Knoll and really take on the responsibility of taking care of this stuff. Again, it also included, catalogs from over the years, really beautiful brochures, textile samples, and even this textile wheel itself was, I think for Knoll Textiles, really an innovation in how you actually sold yardage to people. So these sales tools are beautiful, but really also emblematic of the sort of innovation that the company was responsible for. Some of my favorite pieces, the chair on the left was designed by Don Knorr and was actually in competition, another MoMA competition, the low cost furniture competition, and actually beat out the Eames molded fiberglass chair that was also entered. And so it's kind of fun to think back, his chair, which is a metal chair, beating out at the Eames chair, which is now for Herman Miller still a great bestseller. And the chair on the right is by Jens Rism, who was an early modern designer for Knoll, who was using, material that was available during wartime, even disused parachute strapping to create suspension seating. And today, or just a few weeks ago, we were able to announce our new MillerKnoll archive. And so in this space, we have centralized our furniture collection, as well as a few other key sections of our publications and photography and design drawings, but have opened up with this exhibition we've called Manufacturing Modern. And conveniently, I mean, what you're seeing are really the icons of the brands, but sort of paint a picture of a history of modern design in America. Obviously, we have Bauhaus pieces in there, but the part of those stories being, Florence Knoll, her pedigree as an architect, trained with Mies van der Rohe, worked for Marcel Breuer, and then her sort of Rolodex or relationships were able to build Knoll early on as a powerhouse. And so the Barcelona chair, while it was designed in 1929, it wasn't commercialized as a product until Knoll started selling it in the late 40s. In addition, we talked about the organic design for home furnishings competition and those early co-projects between Eames and Saarinen really leading to other ideas like the womb chair, molded plywood furniture, and beyond. I think between Florence Knoll and George Nelson, also these are two architects who, architecture jobs weren't really happening a lot in the early 40s thanks to the war. And so you had these people actually using their architecture background to create modular furniture and interior architecture in spaces, especially with Florence Knoll and the Knoll Planning Unit, and Knoll really creating the modern office interior in a way and using modular storage to delineate space. But in addition to this sort of manufacturing modern exhibition that's really intended to illustrate that early shared DNA of the companies, We have in total over 3,000 pieces of furniture, and in our new space have about 300 of them on display, all arranged in chronological order from the 1920s up into today. So this is kind of a nice view of, you have this early modern, mid-century modern exhibition on the left, and then on the right is our racks of some of our newest product launches, like a gaming chair or a nesting chair from Stefan Dietz, or chairs from Not One. And so, my job started as Herman Miller. Now as MillerKnoll, our collecting remit has expanded to all of the brands, which is really exciting. So Hey, Muto, Not One, Knoll Textiles, Maharam, and we really get to start to cultivate a contemporary design collecting lens, which I'm super excited about. But here's another view just showing you the vastness. And even on the left, I love to see Saarinen's pedestal series and the Eames fiberglass chairs, early iterations of trying to adapt them for the office. But again, sort of showing you that early shared aesthetic sensibility and even material exploration. And some of the pieces, a lot of them are production. And so, I think design is always sometimes hard to show in a museum context, because I think for some people it's like, I sit on that. Why can't I sit on it in here? Or what makes this different? It's not always a one of one, or it's usually not one of one. These things were produced in mass. But a piece like this was really special in that the provenance is it's a womb chair, an early womb chair that Eero Saarinen gave his mother, that lived at Cranbrook for years and now is in Knoll's collection. It was reupholstered sometime in the 70s with this amazing Jack Lenore Larson crazy textile, but it's really cool to have it in the collection today. Here's another view. So something that's fun or interesting about, a timeline of furniture is obviously a super simple organizing principle, but actually is very illustrative of trends, material innovations, and sort of the evolution of the companies over time. And it's been really successful to start off in that. And it's interesting to see people's reactions and connections that they make. We have early furniture from Florence Knoll. So I think, like I was saying, modular storage, work surfaces, a chair that she designed initially for Rockefeller family offices. But, I think even still Florence Knoll's furniture design and output is underrepresented in larger institutions. And so it's really special to be able to have these pieces and tell that story. As I've said multiple times, Isamu Noguchi is one of my favorite artists and designers, and he was working at mid-century for both Knoll and Herman Miller. And so he actually designed this lamp that you see I talked about at the beginning, was early knocked off, but was a lamp that existed before his Akari series. So in that history of both industrial design and even the progression of these designers and artists and how they worked is evident in our space. And the lamp is sitting on top of his cyclone table and stools that he created for Knoll in the mid-50s. And also get to have the postmodernists represented through these great Knoll projects with Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi and Ettore Sottsass, who I think in the 80s, in the 90s were taking Knoll and really bringing it into that postmodern trend that maybe is also a little bit of a forgotten aspect of Knoll's past. So we were very excited to uncover these in those racks, and they're certainly a fan favorite in the space today. But the archive itself, as I've talked about how the business uses it, we've also been open in a way to researchers, authors, students over the years, but kind of in a sense of only if you know to call us, And now we're sort of outwardly promoting the fact that this is a resource, not only for our business, but for curators, students, and beyond. And so this is our reading room that we do use to facilitate that research. And it's a great place to write my emails, which I do many days. But it's also a place where we have kept our kind of most treasured printed matter. So these early catalogs from Knoll and Herman Miller, early Herman Miller fabric and wallpaper sample books, but kind of just giving you a sense of what is actually in this reading room. And it also includes Florence Knoll's early paste ups. So you saw earlier, you know, Gerard was kind of working in a similar way where he's taking actual physical samples of the textiles to illustrate how things are going to look and feel together. But Florence, I think, took it a step further and would create these assemblages that is, you know, the layout of this office. And so here's the veneer on the desk, here's the textile that will be used on the chairs. But her approach of doing this to help a client see what it's going to look and feel like, going into as much detail as including little plants and artwork. But these start to take on their works of art themselves. So I showed you guys the mid-70s Cranbrook exhibition, Knoll and Herman Miller. And so that was actually a prompt to to take on another project with Cranbrook Art Museum today. And so this is Andrew Blauvelt, who is the director of the Cranbrook Art Museum, and Bridget Bartal on the left, who was a MillerKnoll curatorial fellow. And so over the past few years, we've supported curatorial fellowship that recently culminated in an exhibition opening at Cranbrook last Friday, entitled Eventually Everything Connects, Mid-Century Modern Design in the US. So Bridget and Andrew compiled yet another huge, amazing tome of mid-century modern design history, specifically in the US, but really taking that notion and I think expanding the aperture of what who gets included in the history of mid-century modern design. So I talked a bit earlier about someone like Tomoko Miho, who actually had a huge impact on the development of graphic design at mid-century, the brand identity of Herman Miller, but is not a name that people are ultimately super familiar with. And so this book and exhibition seeks to kind of talk about all of the people alongside the Eameses, alongside, you know, Eero Saarinen and beyond, but really giving a more diverse look at the history of mid-century modern design. And it also talks about, you know, how this stuff was displayed and sold at mid-century. So this is a look inside the book, and one of the essays actually written by our senior archivist, Alexa Hagen. But really, again, you know, talking about these big ideas that existed, but also interspersing that with the stories of other people. So I think that is my last slide. And I'll open it up to questions. I was trying to see if there were any
Thank you,
questions.
Amy. Yeah,
Well,
don't worry. I'm
Amazing.
managing the questions over here.
Okay,
Thank you
great.
so much. Just a quick question before I promote one of our designers to panelists. Just she can ask her question like, where is the archive located and how can people go to it?
Great question. It is located in Holland, Michigan, at MillerKnoll's corporate campus. And so right now it's open by appointment. And you can email me, Amy Auscherman at millerknoll.com, if you're planning a trip or you have a research inquiry.
Amazing. So we don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna quickly promote Martine. She had two questions for you, so let me bring her on stage and she can ask her a question.
Amazing presentation, Amy. Wow,
Thanks.
so much. I have a list of questions myself, so I don't know if we have time, but hi, Martine.
Hi, guys. Hi, Amy. It's so nice to meet you. I actually live like 1 mile from Cranbrook. So I run through the campus every morning. My kids go to Brookside. I went to Cranbrook for high school. So like everything you're saying is very close to my heart in my history. And it's really nice to hear even more than what I've known about the history of the whole, you know, community and all the designers. But in particular, you know, we're going to have to do this fast. My area of expertise and interest is sustainability and waste management. And I've never heard anybody talk about the materials in the way you've just mentioned with using the parachutes and World War II kind of materials. And I just didn't know if there's any sort of record out there of sort of healthier business practices during that time, or if it just didn't exist.
I mean, it's interesting to consider, like, at that time, like, sustainability wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And yet, I think the, construction of this stuff, the intent that it was meant to keep, and even how we talk about it today as a company, it's like these are heirlooms and there's a warranty, and actually sustainability is also built in the fact that you could keep these things forever or they retain their value. I think at mid-century it was looking at war and that industry really fueling a lot of material innovation at the time, like fiberglass, which was used for airplane nose cones and all of that. So I think designers at the time, being curious, but also wanting to tap into the industry that was happening alongside of them. And even today, it's like, I think that sensibility is what is interesting to carry forward, of like, what are other things from other industries that are being created that we could use in ours? Like, what could you make a chair out of that's actually going to biodegrade? And I think MillerKnoll is certainly doing that today, in a sense of like, can we use recycled plastic in our chairs? I mean, I think you look at our task seating, and the Aeron chair, I think 90% recycled plastic now. Creating new upholstery options for something like the Eames lounge chair, which we've just launched a leather alternative that's made from mushrooms. So I think, that sensibility of mid-century, where there's that curiosity about new materials to be used, in addition to the baked in longevity, I think is the DNA that certainly, when we are working with designers today, is like at the top of mind.
Yeah. And then my other quick question is, with all your research and everything that you're doing, it sounds like you're helping designers and consult, but have you found yourself actually designing while you're going through this process?
No, just more like it's fun when we get the prompt from our creative directors for the brands of like, what are things that we can bring back? So we recently reintroduced tables designed by Joe Durso from the 80s from Knoll that are really cool. We just relaunched an Alexander Girard stool that I've always been a fan of. So we kind of get to dole out that sort of early research to our creative directors, that then it's fun to see when things actually make it through and get reintroduced. But I don't know that I'd call myself a designer. I'm
awesome. Well,
just
thank
a
you
fan.
for the time. It's really nice to meet you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Martin. We have one more question from Fatima. I'm going to bring her on stage as well.
Cool.
Here she comes.
Hello, thank you for the presentation.
No.
Okay, so my question is there any possibility to be part of the restoration or conservation department? Because, well, currently I'm on a workshop on Italy, and I'm doing wood shop and easels painting conservation.
Cool. That's a great question. And we don't have yet an internal sort of restoration team. And even, it's fun to talk to. I mean, we're a manufacturing company, so there are people doing like veneer work, and especially actually in North Carolina and Georgia, where we make a lot of our wood furniture. So there's that craftsmanship aspect, but we don't yet have like, and we even need it for our own objects in the archive. It's like, oh, we need a veneer kind of repair, or we need a shock mount. So We don't have anything technically right now, but it's cool to hear you ask because it's something that I personally feel like, I don't know, from a business perspective, if you have an Hermes bag, you can like send it off and get it cleaned, or your watch, your Rolex, there's luxury, obviously, but there is like a customer experience part of, these investments that people make. This furniture is not cheap. And part of that is saying, oh, it's going to last forever if you take care of it. So how do we help people take care of it? And that's personally something that I look forward to seeing how it evolves as a business. And myself, like being a squeaky wheel internally.
Okay.
Thank you for
So,
Thank you.
where could I look for opportunities for the future in this area?
That's a great I mean, museums that have conservation departments, or you could start your own business because there are definitely, especially in the States, I think people who have built small businesses restoring furniture and not even just mid-century. I think, people who want stuff fixed or refinished, it's really an art. And so, again, it's not even just mid-century modern furniture, it's all objects. So I know that there are, in the United States, for example, there's a program at a museum called Winterthur, which is a house museum, but also has uh, like a conservation program that I've had friends go through, or it's sort of the feeder program to, oh, I want to go work in the conservation department at the Met. So I think if you look at these bigger, larger institutions globally, whether it's the Pompidou or the Triennale, like I would say that all of these huge institutions likely have conservation in-house, or they're contracting out with businesses. There's actually we have to get a Harry Bertoia sculpture cleaned that we have in our collection. And there is a business in Chicago called the Conservation Center. And so it's like a private business that I think gets contracted by museums, but also like private collectors. So it's a whole industry. I mean, I think like definitely a lot to research around and figure out where you want to plug into it, but it's possible.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Fatima. We'll
Thank
let
you.
you jump off. We're gonna close the webinar. I'll let Odile do that.
Thank you. Martin, you came up again, but I guess just to say goodbye. No, you don't have any questions. Okay, that's good. Now, I just want to comment, it's not really questions, but you talked so much about the designers, and I think you mentioned, I think the EAMS, not only they were designing like a chair, but they were like bringing, I mean, thinking about the engineering, about the fabrication, about the materials, and then also about the marketing. I mean, I think it's an approach, and maybe that's something we talk a lot about that with our members and young designers. They should not just think about designing a nice chair, but I think, and all the documentation part. I mean, we see it now with your job. I mean, it's a way to protect, I mean, authenticity, to talk about authenticity. The more you document all the way, I feel, the better chance you have to, if you see one day a copy of your work, the better chance you can bring up everything that document the whole process, right?
It's, I think what we call today, it's like self-promotion. Like you have to manage your brand, your personal brand, or a brand as a designer. And having been lucky enough to do research, for example, with the Eames collection at the Library of Congress, which is massive and ranges from like little paper scraps to like fully baked concepts, like they knew what they were doing. They were committing themselves and their ideas to history. And there's some ego there for sure. But, designers, we all have egos. But that's part of it, is like making sure you're self-documenting. That also becomes self-promoting. Because people like seeing behind the scenes or a sketch, or like, how did this come together? What are the ideas? but it's also making sure that, you know, you have the stuff to prove out, you know, the work that you did. And it also becomes content, like what I'm sharing now. It's like all of this stuff was saved either for a business reason or because the designers had the foresight or the ego to keep it as proof. And, you know, even when I'm working with designers today that are being briefed on projects, it's like, what, imagine there is a exhibition about your chair in 20, 50 years. What do you have to show, or what do you want the story to be? What are the drawings? What are the aha moments? What's the one prototype that really was a breakthrough? Because nowadays, you know, the material or the detritus of design is so much more voluminous with digital. And even correspondence, you know, I showed that funny letter of like, the chair is ugly. Like those conversations happen over email or Microsoft Teams or Zoom. And so there's a little bit or a lot on designers to make sure that they are documenting and keeping that story alive to tell later on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. No, thank you. I think again, that's really also a big lesson, like for everyone, like to listen to you about that and the importance of the photography. You mentioned the Noguchi table, which is maybe the photography you like the most, but maybe doing beautiful photos, documenting all that is something that everyone should always keep in mind for sure. And also the value of collaboration. I mean, all those became star, we're all friends, and it's just like creating a movement, really. And I think the value of collaboration and working together is also, it feels like something that everyone should keep in mind. I mean, it's not about stealing the idea of the other, it's about working together and doing something special. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I think there was always probably a little bit of friendly competition, but ultimately it was an exchange of ideas. And yeah, I think that's a part of design.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you again. I think I posted your email address. I did that because you said you can email me. So
Email me.
We'll be sharing even to the other members, those who missed it, if they have any interest. And I'm sure everyone will have interest to come and visit, research, and come to work there in this beautiful space. We were saying earlier we should organize